I'll begin. Good morning. Distinguished heads of state and government, distinguished ministers, distinguished representatives of intergovernmental organizations, United Nations agencies, and representatives of stakeholder groups, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I call to order the special session for enhancing disaster preparedness and effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction of the 2017 Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. Let me take this opportunity to cordially welcome all of you to this session. My name is Eris Papadopoulos, founding chair of UNISDR Private Sector Advisory Group, and now the ARISE, which is now the ARISE Private Sector Alliance for Disaster Resilient Societies, and founding chair of Resilience Action Fund. I am also the retired CEO of Titan America, having had 25 years of construction industry experience. I'm honored to serve as your co-chair, together with Excellency Mr. Shigeki Habuka, Vice Minister for Policy Coordination of Cabinet Office of Japan, the Honorable Ms. Lourdes Tiban, Member of the National Parliament of Ecuador and Special Envoy, UN Envoy for Indigenous People. The topic of our deliberations this morning is Sendai Framework Priority 4. The summary of our discussions here today will be reflected in the Global Platform Chair's summary, which will be presented at the closing ceremony. The Chair's summary will be submitted to the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development to inform their deliberations on Sustainable Development Goals 1, 2, 3, 5, 9, and 14 in July of this year. The session aims to share current progress and challenges in advancing Priority 4 through shared lessons learned, including failures, as well as making key recommendations to address gaps. The discussion shall build upon the outcomes of the regional platforms for disaster risk reduction held since the third UN World Conference on DRR to take action going forward. Related to Priority 4, these outcomes have emphasized the following main elements in two areas. The first area, for enhancing preparedness for effective response. 1, enhanced coordination and collaboration at all levels. 2, ensuring an inclusive all of society and gender-sensitive approach. And 3, increased investment in structural and non-structural measures. And the second direction, for building back better in recovery, has 3 components. 1, the importance of planning for recovery prior to disasters. 2, utilizing knowledge. And 3, inclusiveness and engagement of different stakeholders in recovery. Before we proceed, my co-chairs would like to make some opening remarks. I now ask for Excellency Mr. Habuka's opening remarks. Thank you.
I am Shigeki Habuka, Vice Minister of Cabinet Office of Japan in charge of disaster risk reduction. I am a co-chair for this special session. Japan has experienced many disasters and has recovered from them using lessons learned from the past. The Great Hanshin-Awaji earthquake in 1995 was an island earthquake that occurred underneath the densely populated urban area. It gave critical damage to people and assets in the area. For example, the number of totally collapsed houses exceeded 100,000 units. Since then, with concerned efforts among citizens, local and national governments, as well as all related stakeholders, disaster resilience has been improved in the affected area. I'd like to highlight that investment on developing earthquake-resistant buildings was one of the most important actions. In affected areas of the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, the most critical challenges in the reconstruction processes are, first, to relocate the former residential area to a highland area. Second, to develop and increase height of seawalls. And third, to construct highways so that they are able to serve as seawalls. The reconstruction projects are in steady progress. For example, 61% of the development projects for relocating residential areas have completed at the end of February 2017. In order to achieve Build Back Better, I would like to point out 3 important actions. First, diverse stakeholders' participation in reconstruction processes has to be secured. In the affected area by the Great East Japan earthquake, citizens' associations for reconstruction towns were established to develop reconstruction plans in many areas. Citizens' associations responded to the autonomy of citizens and prioritized to build consensus among them. Reconstruction plans were prepared in each affected districts through dialogue among all stakeholders who were related to the reconstruction plans, including residents, business sector, landowners, and local governments. You may think that it takes time to build a consensus. However, we learned that citizens' consensus at the planning stage contributes to the smooth implementation of reconstruction projects. Second, it is important to prepare a policy framework in advance of any natural disasters to implement a reconstruction plan. After the Great East Japan earthquake, the national government established new special laws to help local governments implement reconstruction plans. For example, special laws enables substantial financial support and deregulation for reconstruction projects. However, we learned that such a process to establish a special law after an event occurs is not efficient. Learning from this experience, the Act on Reconstruction After Large-Scale Disasters was established in 2013. It provides special measures for deregulation to be applied to reconstruction projects which will be needed after the extreme large-scale disasters in the future. The special measures include simplification of procedures for devising land use plan and deregulation for approval on reconstruction projects. The special measures also after that the national government may execute and implement the reconstruction projects on behalf of local governments which requested the national government to do so. It helps to reduce work of local governments in the affected areas. This is an example to explain the importance of preparedness for recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction stage for Build Back Better. Third, it is important to assess the risk of large-scale disasters in the future and to coordinate possible countermeasures in advance. For example, preparation for disaster waste is one of the good examples. Disposing disaster waste promptly is a very important first step for recovery and reconstruction. Therefore, the national government requested local governments to prepare disaster waste disposal plans in advance based on concrete calculation. For example, in Sendai City, the amount of debris and disaster waste generated by the tsunami was equivalent to 7 years of usual garbage disposal amount in the city. However, the city could complete the processing of the disaster waste in just 2 years. This prompt process was possible because the city had developed the guideline for management of disaster-generated waste before the earthquake. By preparing plans in advance, there are many ways to accelerate recovery and reconstruction processes. Those are experiences from Japan regarding important actions to implement Build Back Better. I'm looking forward to learning from panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would now like to ask my fellow co-chair, Her Honorable Lourdes Tiban, for her opening remarks and to introduce our esteemed panelists.
Allí Puncha, buenos días, good morning. Gracias, señor Papadopoulos. Tengo una ponencia para hacerlo, pero es mejor tomar desde la experiencia, porque estamos aquí para ver cómo, unidos todos los países en el mundo, podemos hacer que las consecuencias de los desastres naturales sean mucho menores y, sobre todo, salvemos vidas, no tanto los bienes, las vidas. Y por eso considero importante todas las ponencias de preparatorias que ha habido en estos 2 días anteriores. Nos alimenta a cada uno de nosotros para ser mejores cada día más en nuestros países, para ver cuál es la parte que nos está faltando, y creo que de todo el esfuerzo que están haciendo los estados, las ONGs, la cooperación internacional, los recursos nacionales, veo que hace falta tomar en cuenta a la sociedad civil, no pensando en que mañana vamos a tener un desastre natural, sino pensando en que todos los días tenemos que estar listos y dispuestos a enfrentar este tipo de acontecimientos que no está mucho en el control del hombre. De pronto, los fenómenos de lluvias, los fenómenos invernales, los incendios, son posibles monitorearlo. Pero lo que no podemos hacer mucho es los terremotos, las erupciones volcánicas, que de pronto tenemos muy pocos segundos para reaccionar, y frente a eso creemos que hay que trabajar todos los días sin pensar que tal día esa consecuencia natural que no depende del hombre puede llegar. En el Ecuador, en el 2015, tuvimos un año muy difícil. Tuvimos que enfrentar la quema de los bosques en grandes hectáreas por las sequías alargadas. Tuvimos que prepararnos para unas inundaciones por el fenómeno del Niño en la costa ecuatoriana. Pero justo por el mes de agosto del 2015 se dio algo que sí se puede prevenir, algo que no podemos dejar que pase desde los estados. Es una gran movilización nacional de ciudadanos y ciudadanas en contra de un régimen. Y cuando la movilización había llegado a la capital de la República, ocurrió algo fantástico desde la naturaleza. Comenzó el volcán más alto, que me parece que es el volcán más alto activo de la región, el volcán Cotopaxi. Esa misma noche que la movilización de la sociedad civil había tomado la capital de la República, comenzó a echar humo y comenzó a tirar ceniza. Lo primero que se ocurrió en la parte política es lanzar un decreto de emergencia para que todo el mundo se vuelva a las casas, para que nadie quede en la capital, y efectivamente, con un decreto de excepción, resuelves terminando un hecho político, pero no resuelves el tema elemental, esa reacción de la naturaleza. Un decreto de emergencia tiene que ser con recursos económicos, y para eso los estados y la sociedad civil tenemos que estar preparados. Como el volcán no erupcionó y se quedó ahí, como que la gente se fue a la casa y el volcán también volvió a dormir, volvimos a ser pasivos, no actuamos, y de pronto pasó 6 meses y te llega el terremoto en la costa ecuatoriana. Un terremoto que nos costó muchísimas vidas humanas, un terremoto que lamentamos mucho, pero ni la sociedad civil ni el Estado estuvimos preparados, porque después de la tragedia tú no sabes cómo organizar a la sociedad, tú no sabes en qué momento llegan los alimentos te llegan de dentro del país y de fuera del país, y te llega en zozobra, te llega a pudrir, te llega a dañar los alimentos. Pero eso solo pasa un mes hasta 2 meses. Y sin embargo, hemos pasado 2 años y todavía las secuelas del terremoto continúan. Todavía no sabemos si vamos a seguir subiendo los impuestos para poder reconstruir la costa ecuatoriana. Por eso, considero con esta experiencia que todo lo que se está haciendo como esfuerzos son positivos, pero como representante de los pueblos indígenas, yo vengo de una comunidad indígena, he sido legisladora por 2 periodos, por el movimiento indígena, por la sociedad civil, y quiero decirle a cada uno de los estados, a cada uno de las ONGs, a la cooperación internacional, que tomemos en cuenta ese sector, el más vulnerado dentro de la sociedad civil. Los pueblos y nacionalidades indígenas necesitan tener un trato diferenciado en momentos de tragedias naturales, de desastres naturales, porque se debe trabajar alertas tempranas tomando en cuenta su situación geográfica, su condición étnica, su condición lingüística, sus usos y costumbres, para tener preparado un inventario a dónde le vamos a movilizar a estas familias sin que la movilización, sin que el forzar a las poblaciones cambiar de su territorio implique terminar con su identidad y permita no continuar con su historia, con su tradición, con su legado. Eso es lo único que puedo pedir en este evento del mundo, para que en ninguno de los estados los pueblos indígenas sufran una doble consecuencia: el hecho natural y el hecho de desarraigarse de su cultura, de su identidad, y que permitamos después, en la reconstrucción, que le preguntemos a los pueblos originarios cuál quiere que sea el antes que fue y el después de la tragedia, que no sea la ruptura de la continuidad histórica de los pueblos llamados, entre comillas, minorías étnicas. Con esta introducción tengo el honor de presentar a nuestros distinguidos panelistas para esta sesión. Su Excelencia la señora Inonge Wina, vicepresidente de Zambia. El señor Khalid Abu Ishaq, director del programa de la Zona Económica Especial de Aqaba, Jordania. La señora Marcia Roth, directora general del Departamento de Estrategias y Manejo Inclusivo de Emergencias y exdirectora de la Oficina de Integración de Discapacidades y Coordinación para la Agencia Federal de Manejo de Emergencias de los Estados Unidos, FEMA. El señor Johannes Luschner, director del Departamento de Manejo de Emergencias, Protección Civil, Europa y Ayuda Humanitaria, ECO. Ahora le doy la palabra a mi estimado moderador, el señor Aris Papadopoulos, espero no confundirme con el Papa Francisco, Papadopoulos, para sus palabras de apertura y moderación de este panel.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I've been in the construction industry for 25 years, and to aid our discussion, would like to make 2 points. First, the most vulnerable part of our cities and communities are not the infrastructure and large facilities. They are our homes and small businesses. These are generally built to lower standards. For most people in the world, a home is the center of their wealth. And when they lose their home, they've lost everything. Women, children, elderly, and disabled are particularly affected by loss of home. A home should not simply be affordable, it should be resilient. We need to make a resilient home affordable. The second point is that we cannot look at the Sendai priorities in isolation from each other. Priority 3 calls for building better from the start. In my experience, you cannot build back better unless you have already established the standards for building better from the start. Post-disaster is too stressful a time to begin and accomplish all this. Therefore, we must begin the process of setting standards for building better from the start way in advance in order to be ready and able to build back better when disaster strikes. Thank you. I would like now to invite Her Excellency, Ms. Inong M. Wina, Vice President of the Zambia, to begin the panel presentation and share the Zambia's experience.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to commend UNISDR for successfully organizing this special session on building back better during this platform. Since the adoption of the Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction, Zambia has embarked on a process of domesticating the framework through interconnected international and national frameworks, such as the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Program of Action for Disaster Risk Reduction in Africa being promoted by the African Union, the SADC Disaster Preparedness and Response Strategy, which is a product of Southern African countries, and the 7th National Development Plan, which is a homegrown development plan for Zambia. Zambia has mainstreamed disaster risk reduction in all sectors in the 7th National Development Plan. This is to ensure compliance and accountability. The goal of it is to prevent new and reduce existing disaster risks in the country through multi-sectoral and all-inclusive measures that prevent and reduce hazard, exposure and vulnerability to disaster, and increase preparedness for response and recovery, thus strengthen the resilience of our communities. Zambia is putting in place a disaster loss database which will help in calculating macro indicators such as economic loss, mortality, as well as guide investment in disaster risk investment. The 7th National Development Plan has identified a number of strategies to help build back better. The execution of these strategies will include programs such as productivity enhancing technologies, crop, forestry, and fisheries product diversification, irrigation development, early warning systems development, rural infrastructure development, as well as research. A number of examples can be given regarding the implementation plan in Zambia. And some of these programs have been implemented or are underway in an effort to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Among these are provision of roofing materials for displaced households due to disaster. These are now being given to these individuals as opposed to provision of tents only. The education sector is increasingly adopting the use of steel as opposed to timber for roofing school infrastructure. And under the community-based disaster risk management and early warning, government is undertaking the pilot program for climate resilience, or PPCR, whose objective is to strengthen Zambia's institutional framework for climate resilience and improve the adaptive capacity of vulnerable communities in the Kafue and the Barosi sub-basins, thereby removing them from the poverty cycle. A social marketing campaign has been put in place. This is aimed at promoting and creating awareness on the importance of addressing climate change and the related risks from national to community levels. Under strengthening early warning systems, this is aimed at increasing capacity for risk knowledge, monitoring and warning service, dissemination and communication, and the response capacity of government and other humanitarian agencies and communities in the pilot sub-basin. Zambia has established a database platform to facilitate the sharing of climate risk data, information, and knowledge among its government officials, humanitarian agencies, as well as in the communities. Further, in the project area of the Barosi Basin, my office is piloting a two-way early warning system in Isioma district in the western part of the country by setting up a climate information center at community level before rolling it out to other districts within the project area. Under the same pilot program for climate resilience, there is a climate resilient infrastructure standards and codes. And this is widening and deepening of canals in the western part of the country in the same project area. And this is facilitating human and animal movement in order to enhance trade and economic activity. And with the widening and the opening up of canals, it has been discovered that economic activities are being enhanced, as well as fish farming and other agricultural activities. The land that has been claimed from the clearing of canals is available now for cultivation and thus improved yields in agriculture. And in conclusion, Mr. Moderator, I want to reiterate the need for enhanced risk governance and coordination of stakeholders. Zambia was therefore seeking partnership with governments and agencies that have been promoting technologies in affordable housing, slum upgrading, especially for vulnerable communities, and the provision of affordable and sustainable risk insurance. We need to share information in some of these areas where Zambia may not have made big strides. With these few remarks, I want to thank you, Mr. Moderator, for inviting Zambia to participate in this debate on building better, in building back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for sharing those very important thoughts. I'm now pleased to invite Mr. Khalid Abu Ishaq to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Moderator. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the chance to speak about the Jordan experience in this field. Jordan is facing many challenges at the moment. Among them is the unknown risk that is coming from the regional perspective. We are right now facing the challenge of the Syrian refugee, which is exerting the pressure in our infrastructure. This is putting more pressure in the schools, in the water, and in the existing infrastructure all over Jordan. Yet, as a part of the Arab states, Jordan is right now working with the Arab states to formulate the first disaster risk reduction strategy, where the Build Back Better for reconstruction and safe recovery is part of that. Yet with all that in hand, there is a very successful story in Jordan, comes from the city of Aqaba, which has been recognized as a role model city in localizing disaster risk reduction. We in Aqaba right now are in the process of mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in our development processes. We have adopted the process of risk-sensitive land use planning. As you all know, Aqaba is a special economic zone, and there's a lot of investment in the zone. So with that in mind, there is a need to invest in enhancing the building codes to withstand earthquake. Yet a lot of challenges that we still are facing in the country of Jordan and in Aqaba with regard to disaster risk reduction. So I think we have to be prepared to deal with such multiple hazards in the future and to make sure that we are a safe and resilient society. Recently in Jordan, we have started conducting a comprehensive risk assessment profile for the entire Jordan to update our risk assessment and to identify the new risks. In addition to that, we are in the process of integrating disaster risk reduction measures into all municipalities, as in the coming few months we're going to have elections to promote decentralization among Jordan. All that is happening and is moving in Jordan, and there is a great role for the private sector in Aqaba, where they are investing in promoting disaster risk reduction and preparedness for better solutions and for better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khalid Abu Ishaq. I now invite Ms. Marzi Roth to share her perspective.
Good morning, and thank you very much. The Sendai Framework recognizes that not only are women and persons with disabilities disproportionately affected by disasters, but critically that their knowledge and leadership skills are essential for building resilient, inclusive, and equitable societies. Key challenges still remaining to implement Sendai Priority Number 4 and address gaps to ensure all of society engagement. Throughout preparedness, response, Build Back Better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, we must be explicitly inclusive. If inclusion is only implied, surely it is not applied. Saying the words is inadequate. Once we include the words, we must move from words into action. Globally, there are over 1 billion people who have disabilities across our lands. What happens to them has a direct impact not only on them, but on the rest of the society, especially their families and communities. Who are we talking about when we describe disproportionately impacted people? In addition to people with disabilities, we are also referring to older adults, people with chronic or temporary health conditions, women and girls experiencing gender discrimination, women in late stages of pregnancy, people with limited language proficiency, low literacy, or additional communication needs, people with very low incomes, without access to transportation, experiencing homelessness or food insecurity, and so many others. There are major gaps. These include an absence of disaggregated data, inadequate indicators for assessing the implementation of the Sendai Framework, the presence of environmental, communication, and institutional barriers, Did you know that people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or to die in a disaster? And there are similar gaps for all disproportionately impacted individuals, especially women, and certainly families and the communities we live in. So what is the answer? Nothing about us without us. Please don't plan for people with disabilities. Please don't plan for women. Please plan with us. We must be at the table and we must be fully included. The Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies in the United States joins proudly with the Disability Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction Network. We proudly use the motto, all of us, for disability inclusive disaster risk reduction. And it's important that our language adequately reflect what it is that we are all striving for. We cannot refer to individuals as being vulnerable. We are vulnerable because we are not included. Certainly, as my colleagues have pointed out, certainly buildings, the places that we live provide tremendous vulnerability. But we as people are only vulnerable when we're not included. And we can help you to include us. We know that there are accommodations needed. We know that universal accessibility does require planning. We will work with you to achieve true inclusion for all of us. Very simply, we have some recommendations. Building back better must be more than words. Disaster is never welcomed, but recovery is a surprising gift to rally the whole community to be sure we truly build back better for all of us. We must work closely with our colleagues, addressing climate change adaptation and eliminating silos that deplete our power as agents of change. We must introduce accessibility protocols, ensuring effective and appropriate participation of persons with disabilities, individuals with access and functional needs, disproportionately impacted women and men and their families, leaving no one behind. And finally, we must transform the commitments made in Sendai into truly inclusive actions at all levels, as inclusion saves lives and is the key to resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Marzi Roth, for sharing your perspective and some very important facts. I now invite Mr. Johannes Luckner to share his perspective.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank ISDR and Mexico for the organization of this event. I've been asked to be very brief, so I will address 2 points. One, international cooperation, and secondly, work at the local level. On international disaster risk reduction, I'm not very worried because I deal with disaster response on a daily basis, and just in this region, when I look at the last couple of years, we had the Haiti earthquake, Hurricane Matthew. We intervened in Peru for the floods, in Ecuador in the earthquake, in Chile for the forest fires. And of course, each such event increases the consciousness of policymakers that disaster risk reduction is actually a good idea, both politically and economically. We also have the international agreements on a number of large issues, including the Sendai Framework for Action, which reflect that consciousness. We see more and more in our daily work and in our evaluations that governments are indeed interested in disaster risk reduction. But we need a reality check, because we are still in a situation where most of our money goes to response. For $100 spent on response, we spent $1.3. $1.3 on disaster risk reduction. At the European Union, at the European Commission, what we're trying to do is to change that ratio drastically by making sure that disaster risk reduction is included not only in our development cooperation, humanitarian aid, civil protection, but also in our EU internal policies. The emphasis is on preparedness for preventive and early action in order to avoid unnecessary loss of life and unnecessary costs. And while it is absolutely true that we're in the business of saving lives, we are also making an effort to illustrate the costs and the benefits of disaster risk reduction because that's what finance ministers need if we want to change the ratio. Now, if I think that at the level of the international community, regional organizations, national governments, there's a lot of progress, I would also emphasize what some speakers before have said. Early response, disaster risk reduction is above all something that has to happen at the local level. The European Union just has increased for 2018 disaster preparedness allocations for local communities in third countries to 50 million euros annually in order to strengthen, in particular, local preparedness systems and local communities. After the motto, as local as necessary, as local as possible, and as international as necessary. In our own action inside the European Union, our budget in terms of preparedness, risk reduction, and response is already following a ratio of about 50-50. More and more our member states ask the European Union to invest more heavily in preparation and risk reduction than in response. We also try within our programs to integrate response and recovery strategies even where the nature of a program is purely humanitarian. Last year, more than half of all of our projects include disaster risk reduction activities. Finally, one last point, as a donor addressed to donors, financing for a local early response needs to be predictable. There needs to be a program. It needs to be done in cooperation with the private sector, in particular the insurance sector, and we have taken some initiative, including in this region, in the Caribbean, to make that possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Luchter. Thank you to all our panelists for today's discussion and introducing some very interesting perspectives. Allow me to delve a little deeper into the subject with some specific questions to our panelists. And in the interest of time, I'll ask for 1 minute responses, if possible. Your Excellency, Ms. Enog Mwina, what are your key recommendations to address gaps in delivering the Sendai Framework targets? And if you wish to mention in particular, in coherence with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement?
Since the adoption of the Sendai Framework, countries like Zambia are in the process of implementing some of the targets. But we have realized that there are some gaps that need to be addressed. And one of these is the issue of community sensitization for our communities to understand all the dimensions of disaster risks. Secondly is the mobilization of resources to address disaster risk reduction preparedness. Again, the enhancing the capacity of our communities to actually participate and take ownership of the preparedness so that these communities can become resilient.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'd like to ask the same key question to each of the panelists in their respective areas. Mr. Abu Ishaq, reflecting on your experience and the key challenges that still remain in implementing Sendai Priority 4, what are your key recommendations to address the gaps in local and national shared responsibility and empowering local decision makers?
I think one of the key challenges that is remaining, at least to reflect in my experience in Jordan, is the coordination mechanism among the local government and the national government. This is still a remaining phase challenge. And I think one of the ways to deal with this challenge is to start working in creating local and national platforms where you can create this multi-stakeholders national dialogue and bring all the science community, all the key players, factors in disaster reduction, and here we can create this platform where everybody could exchange and strengthen and empower local decision makers so they all read from the same page and they all be in coherence with the national government. So I think this is one of the challenges. Another thing is public awareness and engaging the locals. Still, the idea of engaging the locals in decision making is not prevailing. And I think it's very important to invest in engaging the locals and the private sector to be in line with this in decision, that such decision could be risk-informed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khalid Abu Ishaq. I now invite Ms. Marcy Roth to reflect on the key challenges that still remain in implementing Priority 4 and share her key recommendations to address gaps to ensure an all of society engagement.
Thank you very much. I want to ask each of you a question. Are people who need physical accessibility welcome at your planning tables? Can they get there? Can they get through the door? Can people who need communication accommodations fully participate? Are sign language interpreters provided, or is that something that's considered to be too expensive or too extraneous? Are people who have mental health disabilities, are women excluded simply because of stigma, simply because of practices that keep people away from the planning table? The biggest opportunity that we have in building back better is in taking some very simple steps to make sure that all of us are welcome at the table, and that those are not just words, but that we are truly accommodating by building universally accessible planning, preparedness, and then throughout response, recovery, resilience. If your community describes itself as a resilient community and you can't answer positively to the question, are we physically accessible? Are we providing effective communication access? Are our programs accessible? Then you're not truly a resilient community, and it's time to invite us to the table to help you to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marcy Roth. I now invite Mr. Johannes Luchter to reflect on those key challenges that remain in implementing this Priority 4 and share his recommendations on gaps and how to enable international cooperation and support community capacities.
I think there are a number of areas. One, which refers back to what you said in the introduction, is we need an appropriate policy and legal framework. You can't think about building standards once a disaster has hit and how you build back better. You need to do that before them. You need practical guidelines for implementing disaster laws, disaster response laws, disaster preparation laws where they exist. You need to clarify the roles of different stakeholders. We see it in the European Union, outside the European Union. The cooperation, the information flow between the regional level, the local level, the national level, the international level needs to be improved. We need to continue to reinforce our work directly with communities. One point I made earlier, I think here among specialists it is always assumed that prevention is better than cure. However, we need, I think, to build a much better stock of assessments of the hard evidence of the benefits of funding preparedness and the costs of not doing so, not only for finance ministers, but political makers in general. And it won't surprise you that as a representative of the European Union, I would strongly insist that we need to do more at regional level. Disasters, more and more, don't stop at national borders. We need regional cooperation. We need to share regional problems, work on regional programs to also bring together and share the resources that are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists for sharing their insights on the challenges and opportunities of implementing Priority 4. I'm sure many in the audience would wish to contribute to the discussion. In order to maximize the time available to us and allow as many participants as possible to take the floor, I would urge all speakers to kindly observe the time limit of 1 minute for interventions. All participants are invited to speak from their seats. Kindly raise your nameplate or hand so I may invite your interventions. Please identify yourself, your affiliation, and the panelists to whom you are addressing your question. We will take 3 questions at a time.
Yes, okay, only one there, so we can actually start.
What's the
from,
name?
Okay, there are 2.
What's the
Okay,
names?
there are 3, okay. Can you get to from there, who are there?
Can you read the names? I think
Yes,
it's
we can actually
okay.
start from there.
okay. I think we can start with the gentleman from Mexico. I think I read correctly.
¿Se escucha? Se escucha. Muchas gracias y felicidades a los panelistas. Me limito antes que nada a darles la bienvenida a México en nombre de la delegación del Gobierno de México y a reconocer el trabajo de la Oficina de Naciones Unidas para Reducción de Desastres. Uno de los avances más importantes de Sendai es la manera de asumir riesgos y cómo hacerles frente sin comprometer el desarrollo. En este nuevo paradigma implica e involucra activamente la participación de actores y gobiernos locales. En este sentido, quisiera preguntar a los panelistas qué podemos hacer para crear incentivos de largo plazo para los gobiernos locales, para que los gobiernos locales sean actores y beneficiarios de los esfuerzos de reconstruir y prepararnos mejor. ¿Qué tipo de asociaciones debemos favorecer y fortalecer? Muchas gracias.
Thank you. The second question is from what?
Yes, community-based organization over there.
I think it's a community-based organization. Could you please take the speaker?
Okay. Okay.
Please identify yourself and your organization.
Yes. My name is Kiyoshi Murakami. I'm representing city of Rikuzen Takata, Iwate, Japan, which is completely wiped out by tsunami 2011. And I'd like to congratulate all of your participants this time to express great ideas, and also the following the Sendai Framework. The city of Rikuzen Takata has been also working closely together with the central government of Japan to create new city, which is completely starting from zero to completely new city. Now, here's a question we have, is that one thing is that even though we have strong political will to lead a city build back better, but without strong leadership of the mayors or top leaders, and also were trained how to make things better. Without those things, it is very difficult to do it. I think in this case, strong leadership of the top leaders is essential. I'd like to have anybody of the podium can answer to the question. Thank you very much.
I don't think I understood the question, yeah.
Local government. Local government.
Okay, I think there's a representative from local government. Would you please take the mic, identify yourself?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Amit Ghosh from the city of Columbus, Ohio. I completely agree with you about your comment about when recovery happens, it's usually the single-family homeowners or the poor or the people that are physically, economically, socially challenged. They're the ones that are last in line to get any kind of help. And I also submit to you that FEMA has Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 44, for example, for retrofitting structures before disaster happens. But I believe what what this body needs to look at is setting up importance factors which are socially and locally or regionally accepted for what needs funding, because what it boils down to eventually is funding. And International Code Council some years ago developed a performance-based code. It's still in its 4th or 5th edition. I was in the drafting committee of the original code, and it gives us a guideline about how to establish where funding should go and where technical expertise should go, and develop a table of importance factors.
Okay, question noted. I think we'll take one fourth question from a remote questionnaire.
I speak on behalf of the remote hub in Bangladesh, and I read out the question. We, the persons with disability from Bangladesh, would like to know how much of universal design guidelines are considered for Build Back Better. Are there concrete examples of persons with disability meaningfully participating in this planning process? Thank you.
Thank you. We have 4 questions, and I'm going to invite any of the panelists to address any of these. The first regarded from the gentleman from Mexico, long-term incentives for collaboration with between local governments and I guess other stakeholders. Who would like to address that? Mr. Ashaq.
I will reflect on my local government experience in Aqaba. Aqaba is a special economic zone, and there is a lot of investment from the private sector. And at the same time, we are facing the hazards of earthquake and flash flood. As a local government, we were succeeding to create this partnership with the private sector. This partnership reflected itself in implementing some mitigation measures against like flash flood and earthquake. Now, the incentives that we have thought as a local government was mostly economical incentives, and some incentives has to do with the permits. For example, if we are talking about the private sector, if the private sector would invest in protection measures, they will be eligible to get some discounts from the local government in terms of building permits. And so this is as far as the private sector. Now, if we are talking about long-term incentives for the locals to create this, but it's a matter of ownership. And the idea of insurance is not really prevailing in Jordan yet, but there is where you can really create this partnership with the local people and make them to be part of the solution rather than be part of the problem. And I can recall to one local experience where we engaged the the community in disaster volunteers program, and we have managed to create some small volunteers groups in each community. Now the incentives that they were given by the local government was capacity building. They were exposed to a lot of training. They were given the chance to have like a monthly dialogue with the decision makers. So this is sort of incentives, economical incentives were packaged for the private sector, and some social and recognition for the local community to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Thank you.
Do any of the other panelists wish to add to that commentary, Your Excellency?
In Zambia, we are looking more at strengthening disaster risk governance, where we engage all stakeholders, including the private sector, the government sectors, the civil society organizations, and NGOs, as well as international humanitarian organizations. The political will is there, but most of the time, the response has been based on short-term support to the vulnerable groups, such as relief. So the challenge we have as a country is to work out long-term plans to engage the communities in recovery and construction, as well as engaging all the stakeholders in this process. The local councils are already on board. As I said, there is a very strong political will in Zambia to address these issues. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. In the interest of time, let's move on to the second question from the gentleman from the Japanese city representative. Regarding building back better, the effectiveness of that, I have to admit I didn't understand the full question, but do any of our panelists wish to address that question?
I think he was referring to strong leadership, if I'm not mistaken. And again, at the national level, we have a very strong leadership, is represented by His Majesty King Abdullah II, where he really rally the efforts to fight and combat all kind of disaster. At the local level, strong leadership is very important, but the challenge that sometimes that you have high turnover. Sometimes once you have a very strong leadership, you cannot maintain that he will be in office for long. Then another one will come, then you have to start all over back. So the challenge is sustaining the efforts. But I totally agree that strong leadership is very important to champion the efforts and to create this political commitment and awareness to move on in this build back better. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the third question from, I believe it was in the US, a gentleman referring to the code system and the performance-based codes and their effectiveness. I have some personal experience, but I'll first allow any of the panelists to comment on that. Okay. I've been quite active in the US building code system. Unfortunately, it's a very fragmented system. It's a system essentially that drives standards to the lowest denominator. And it's driven, unfortunately, by the building industry, which obviously does not see the benefit in resilience, sees the cost. And I can't really blame them because the consumer doesn't see the benefit. And until we educate the consumer to value resilience and to recognize the importance of disaster prevention, we won't get the system moving in a different direction. So I can talk extensively about that, but I'll end with that commentary. The final question was from a call-in participant from Bangladesh regarding guidelines for people in need, disability. And I think, Marcy, you're the person I would pick to address that. Would you please?
Thank you very much. Let me step back for a moment and give my gratitude to the people of Rikusan Takata. I've had the great pleasure of visiting and watching how they've taken tremendous tragedy, tremendous loss, and they've used the period of recovery to build an extraordinarily inclusive community. And so to sort of turn the question that you posed back to you, the question is, how can we help you to tell your story? That's the best opportunity for assuring that that leadership continues to grow. So now I'm going to step forward and talk about the wonderful question from our friends in Bangladesh. Universal accessibility is not about being reactive. It's not about making special accommodations. It's about having everybody at the table and figuring out how to optimize resources so that universally we're able to meet as many needs as possible, giving people an opportunity to move from being considered to be a liability in emergencies and disasters, learning how to become an asset, possibly a force multiplier, and ultimately true agents of change. And I know that our colleagues in Bangladesh are already a wonderful example of that sort of leadership and that commitment to universal accessibility. I also want to reflect on the building code issues because it's a great example for all of us. When we build back accessibly, when we use, in the case of the United States, when we use the laws that require physical built environment accessibility, what we're doing is building universal accessibility for everyone, not just for people who have a disability, but someone who sprained their ankle a few moments ago, an older adult who may not identify as having some accommodations, but may benefit equally, and certainly for women, for children, for the whole community, universal accessibility makes it possible for everyone to be included and then to contribute to that leadership growth that our colleagues in Rikusan Takata talked about. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcy, for helping us on that. We've reached the end of the time available for us for this discussion, and I want to thank everyone for their participation. I'd like to highlight one key point. Resilience is an economic development challenge, more than it is an emergency management issue. In my experience, unless we engage the people that are creating the risk, in other words, those investing in and affecting the investment of facilities and communities, we cannot make progress. Unfortunately, most of those people are missing from these forums. They are too busy investing and building vulnerable facilities. How do we motivate them to invest and build resilient facilities, particularly our homes and small commercial sites? Most of them are in the private sector. They are your developers, builders, businesses, services, traders, professionals, lenders, insurers, etc. Bring them into this discussion before disaster strikes. If they are large enough, invite them to join the UN Private Sector Alliance on Disaster Resilient Societies called today Arise. You can find more about this growing private sector network through the UN ISDR. Yesterday, Arise announced its manifesto for the global platform, which includes 7 recommendations, first of which calls for building back better. They are your partners if we all wish to achieve the goal of the Sendai Framework. Thank you. I now would like to hand back over to my core chair, the Honorable Lourdes Teban, to share one key takeaway.
agradecer las intervenciones de todos quienes han compartido ideas fundamentales, sobre todo que nos deja como pastillas para cumplir a futuro. Me ha llamado mucho la atención esta necesidad que ha dicho Su Excelencia, la señora Inonge Wina de Zambia, hacer un inventario sobre la base de necesidades con el gran objetivo de mejorar la inversión para no desperdiciar los recursos que pudiéramos tener en esos momentos. Eso me parece fundamental. También desde Jordania nos ha dado una gran, nos cuenta la experiencia de ver esa necesidad de unir esfuerzos públicos y privados con el desafío de incluso lograr que aprovechemos mejor los adelantos científicos, tecnológicos. Hablamos algo que a muchos también nos falta concientizar, y la señora Marciero nos está como alando las orejas y diciendo: hey, los discapacitados necesitamos especial atención. No mirar cuánto nos cuesta, no mirar cuánto es la inversión para incluirlos, sino más bien pensar en el gran objetivo, que incluyendo tendremos menos consecuencias negativas como es la muerte. Para salvar vidas hay que incluir, eso es lo que nos ha dicho. Y también tenemos como otra reflexión muy fuerte que tendremos que tomarlo en cuenta, la recomendación de Johannes, que ha dicho: vamos a ver cómo invertir esa realidad de la inversión en el sentido de mirar los resultados. Estamos dando mucha plata, pero los resultados como que no están orientados a que la plata esté muy bien invertidos. Así es que hay que hacer una evaluación para ver de alguna manera si estamos o no ganando la confianza de los donadores en cuanto a resultados.
Thank you. Finally, I invite my co-chair, Mr. Habuka, to summarize and offer some recommendations to move us forward.
I would like to list 7 recommendations shared in this special session. First, it was recognized that enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction is important for achieving the global targets in Sendai Framework. Second, cooperation among national and local governments and communities is important. It was also stressed that the multi-stakeholders platform for policy dialogue, both at the national and local levels, be effective for this collaboration in order to share roles and responsibilities among stakeholders. Third, it was emphasized that various stakeholders' engagement, including women, persons with disabilities, and indigenous people, be secured. Participation of stakeholders, including students, in the process to formulate construction plans is important for smooth implementation of reconstruction projects. Disaggregated data collection was also referred as a challenge. Fourth, it was understood that preparedness for disaster recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction contributes to build back better. A legal system for reconstruction should be prepared in advance to facilitate the process. It was also mentioned that risk assessment of anticipated disasters and preparation for situations estimated from the assessment will help promptly recovery and reconstruction processes. Fifth, importance of capacity building for preparedness in communities was also noted. Citizens are often the first responders in emergency cases and have extensive knowledge on local agenda. Community activities by citizens should be a common practice which will become vital in case of disasters. Sixth, international cooperation for disaster risk reduction was pronounced. A large-scale disaster might be beyond the capacity of one country, and in many cases, damage itself goes beyond boundaries. Proportion of regional and global cooperation together with private sector will be essential to prepare for and respond to such situations. Lastly, it was highlighted that the disaster risk reduction politics should be implemented in coherence with politics for sustainable development goals and climate change. I'd like to expect all the participants here today will further implement disaster risk reduction policies, respecting the 7 recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I'd like to make a final announcement at this point. Providing and updating the practical guidance for implementing the Sendai Framework is important. Also important is strengthening communities of practice to contribute to the continuous update of such guidance, such as the words into actions. Today we announce the release of 3 Priority 4 Words into Action interim consultative versions, developed over several months by many experts and advisors of 2 working groups, facilitated by UNISDR. These guidelines are: 1, an introductory capstone on enhancing preparedness for effective response; 2, a concise guide to simulation exercise; and 3, a guideline for Build Back Better in recovery. We invite your review and comments to improve their update. The slide on the screen shows where to access these guidelines. I now give the final word to Her Honorable Lourdes Tiban.
Perdón. De todas las intervenciones que se ha podido recoger, queda en la responsabilidad de los estados, de las instituciones cooperantes y sobre todo de hacer ese enlace con la sociedad civil, considerando personas con prioridades especiales o con discapacidad. Se ha dicho que no solamente miremos la discapacidad, a veces la física, que es la más común, pero que dentro de las personas con atención prioritaria están los adultos mayores, están las mujeres, están los niños y están sobre todo en la obligación, o estamos en la obligación de considerar como puntos importantes a seguir trabajando, ver de alguna manera cómo mejorar las inversiones para ganar confianza de los donantes y también de la buena inversión de los recursos que podemos hacer. Queda también claro, no se ha profundizado mucho, pero para los pueblos indígenas creo que tenemos que apuntar con un objetivo claro, que es, nosotros en la lengua nativa del Ecuador lo decimos, cómo hacer minga para el summa causai. Summa causai significa para que todos vivamos bien, y el vivir bien nos obliga ahora, y tiene que ser, es el reto de este encuentro mundial, el lograr una reconciliación mundial entre el ser humano y la naturaleza. Tal vez ese sea nuestro mejor compromiso para en algo prevenir los desastres, porque el ser humano se ha encargado también de hacer tanto daño a la naturaleza cuando no aplicamos consultas previas en el extractivismo, cuando no cooperamos para mermar los impactos negativos en la naturaleza. Creo que todos estamos en condiciones de lograr ese equilibrio hombre-naturaleza, y ojalá eso pueda ser un aporte para la presente y la futura generación. Quiero agradecer a los distinguidos jefes de Estado y gobiernos presentes, distinguidos ministros, distinguidos representantes de organismos intergubernamentales, Naciones Unidas y grupos de participantes, excelencias, señores y señoras. Muchísimas gracias por su participación.
The session is officially closed. Thank you very much.